Good evening. I would like to open the Master Plan Implementation Committee's July 24th meeting. I am Cheryl Tagayas, the chair. Why don't we go this way?
I'm Josh Eckert Lee, your assistant town planner.
Hi, Roxanne Musto from the select board, and I sit on this committee as a representative.
Or Lizio, appointed member. Dick Burke, appointed member.
Elaine Benson, appointed member.
And then on the screen, we have Tabor.
Tabor Keeley, appointed member.
Great. Okay. I haven't heard from Regina, so maybe she'll come into the next few minutes, but we'll go ahead and get started. So item 1 on the agenda, our next meeting dates, September 18th and October 16th. Are those good for folks?
That's great.
Okay.
All
All right, good. I may be doing some traveling in mid-September, but I don't know the dates yet. So if I do that, since we're not having an August meeting, we'll just do an email and see if we can't get another date. Okay.
Sounds good.
Sure. Okay. All right. Item 2, approval of the meeting minutes.
I received some edits today from member Musto. I'll just bring them up on the screen.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to check emails today, so.
So the first edits were to add, well, maybe Roxanne, you want to speak to these?
Okay, so one was to add in that the town has a consultant, and we had talked about that and mentioned that. So I thought it would be appropriate to put that in for the minutes. There's a DEI consultant, so that talks about that a little bit. Josh put a lot of tune about that. The other thing I had suggested is when we were talking about Milton's character, I had mentioned that it sounded like if you said that there were certain assumptions made, and I had suggested that it's better to have one-on-one conversations with people to ascertain what they meant by that comment, because it sounded, we were told that it sort of implied that there were certain things that were, I think it said
The coded exclusionary.
Yeah. And I thought I had mentioned at the meeting that it would be best not to generalize like that, but to have individual conversations with people to find out about that.
You did say that, I do recall.
And then the last thing was, I had mentioned the way that it was phrased, I had suggested taking out, which has not yet been taken up by, this is talking about the volunteer forms. When we did the volunteer forms and the handbook, everything got sent to Kevin Freitag, who's town council. He reviewed them. And so anything that was brought up in any direction as possibilities, he agreed to the wording that we had, which there's a certain wording in it that's, I think it's in the handbook part, I believe, that talks about that it's, open to everyone. There's no discrimination based on any of the characteristics or whatever. So that was all I wanted to put in for that.
You did mention that too, I recall. Okay.
So I just thought we should put those in since we had mentioned those, or I had mentioned those.
Regina had sent an email as well, right?
Yes,
she didn't give specific.
She said explicitly that those weren't supposed to be edits.
Okay.
Maybe when she joins, we can revisit those.
All right, so maybe what we should do
That
is...
these aren't supposed, I'm sorry.
No, Regina gave a comment about minutes that were not strictly edits. I think they're just thoughts.
Oh, okay.
So I think, all right, so given that, why don't we just defer this until later in the meeting?
Sure.
In the event that she comes, then we can talk about her comments, okay? All right. Citizen speak is third on the agenda. Do we have anyone? We have Adam with us. Will. I don't call you Adam. Will. Adam's like with us from the library, but he's not here for citizen speak. Is there anyone on the? No. Okay. Then we'll go to staff update. Josh.
I think all my updates are going to be relevant to our agenda items.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Our next MBTA Communities meeting will be on August 2014.
August 14th, right?
Is that in
Yes.
person or?
So that will
hybrid?
be in person. We've done virtual meetings. We just had a virtual meeting. I
Yeah.
believe this one would be in person.
And where will that one be?
We haven't yet decided. Our last
Okay.
in person was in the library.
Yeah.
And so it's not unlikely that we'll try to have that space again.
Okay,
Oh, and Regina's just entered.
okay, great. Welcome, Regina.
I'm so sorry. The new website got me.
Oh, okay, no problem. Regina, you had sent an email with a couple of comments. Did you wish to make edits to the meeting minutes?
Yes, there were two minor additions, and I didn't hear anything back, but
Back up. We're gonna bring the minutes back up. Did you, Regina, we reviewed some edits that Roxanne proposed. Were those emailed today, Josh?
Roxanne emailed me her edits today.
Did the committee members get them today?
No, I just made the edit this afternoon.
Okay.
I'll share the screen. The text in red is what Roxanne proposed.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then I don't know if that second even correlate with the second edit, but this is the third edit.
I have a quick question. Is there a reason why, or was there a reason discussed as to why we don't want to say that the recommendation on how to use demographic information has not been taken up in the updates to the volunteer process?
Can I answer that one?
Please.
Thank you. When we did discuss different things when we worked on the handbook, and that was one of the things I believe we had brought up. Kevin Freitag, who is the town attorney, reviewed all of our forms, for volunteer forms, as well as our handbook. And he suggested that we leave things with this kind of thing in there about that we're not going to discriminate, and he didn't feel that we should be capturing demographics at the time. So that was addressed when we did our handbook. So I worked in it with Miss Bradley.
Okay. And I get the addition, the town council recommended that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason why we can't plainly say that was not taken up as a part of the volunteer process by choice?
Well, I mean, it's not on the form, but it was, any of those forms were reviewed by town council. So it's, he makes the final call on what we should be doing.
No, I understand that, but I do think it's important to say that the recommendation was not accepted in town council, or somehow indicate
I see. So
why that recommendation was not followed. And I'm not disagreeing with town council. Please don't get me wrong, but when someone looks and says, the volunteers that we're getting, or the people that are on committees still don't reflect, or now do reflect, the demographics of our town, I think it's important to know that those recommendations were not followed. And then to be able to say later when we try and analyze data and develop our understanding of the practices that we're using and the outcomes they result in, to be able to say, this recommendation was made, town council deemed it blah, blah, blah. So it was not adopted. And yet, 5 years from now, we have data that suggests that it was not necessary given, you know what I mean? Like I do think it's important to be able to pinpoint the decision-making process along the way that will either result in change or will not.
I guess what I would say is if we wanted to leave in that that was the recommendation of the Equity and Justice Committee, I think you could leave that in if that was their suggestion.
Yeah, that's
You know,
currently,
in terms-
that's currently
so-
there.
So, yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is with the other stuff, I don't know what you're looking for, how to phrase it then, I guess, because
Yeah, I can tell
yeah.
you, it's that here it says our forms and committee handbook as well as volunteer forms were reviewed by town council.
yeah.
It doesn't answer to me whether I'm assuming this was a select board.
So it was a select board subcommittee.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah, to work on those two
So
things.
then my question in reading this would be, did the select board subcommittee take the recommendations and those recommendations were kind of vetoed by town council? Or did the subcommittee not try to implement those recommendations and town council reviewed what they were sent? Do you understand what I'm saying, Roxanne?
Yeah, but
I want to know where the decision was made. And I think our town and interested and invested parties who are going to analyze the outcomes of the decisions that we as officials make will want to know who was responsible for the amazing outcomes that come out of this or the status quo that continues to come out of this. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, if we implement a change that works, I want people to get credit for doing that work, right? I want our town to be able to celebrate that we did something down the line that analyzing the data actually worked. And if we didn't, then how can we do better? Does that make sense, Roxanne? It's not about blame. It's just about being able to give credit where credit is due and understand where those decision points are made. Was it just that the subcommittee didn't accept the recommendations and so Freitag never saw it? Or did Freitag actually say, we shouldn't do this because legally, da-da-da-da-da, right? And I'm fine either way. I just think that in the interest of transparency, it is important to know when we're talking about trying to make change. Sorry.
Regina, may I jump in and I'd ask the chair, correct me if I'm wrong here, but minutes are intended to memorialize the last meeting, right? So I'm not sure exactly what was said in the last meeting. Maybe we need to revisit the language that was used in order to determine that. But for us to,
the language that was used was that
that might not have happened are not going to be productive, right? We want to memorialize the meeting that we had
I think
at that time.
Yeah, my recollection is that we did have this very discussion about whether the recommendations were followed or not. And so I think they're both correct. I think both Roxanne and Regina are correct and from my recollection of the meeting. So it's just, but you're right in terms of getting the record straight. I think what Regina's trying to do is get the record straight on what's the timing of the recommendations that came from the committee and the timing and were they considered by the subcommittee of the select board at the time that the forms were updated? I think that's the question that was maybe a little unclear, the answer to that question at our last meeting.
Yeah.
So maybe what we need is a follow-up.
I don't know that we broached that exactly at the meeting. I know that we broached that the updates weren't made and that town council had reviewed and okayed what ended up being used. But I don't know that I don't remember that we delved in deeper to ask, like, was this, did we attempt to utilize the recommendations?
Okay, so maybe what we need to do is a follow-up, Regina, from our committee, maybe an email to the subcommittee from the select board, just to get clarity on that. And then we did leave open to invite the chairs of the committee back, you know, and have to further our discussion because we ran short of time, or not short of time, but we had other agenda items to get onto, right? So it really wasn't sort of a final conclusion of a conversation. It felt like we just kind of stopped the conversation, right, at the time point and had to move on. So given that, Regina,
So I go back to then why, what feels wrong about leaving in that those recommendations were not included in the new volunteer process?
So why don't we say there is a question about whether those were included, because I don't know that we have the answer, and I don't know that the answer was given at the meeting.
Well, they're not included in the final forms. We can say that. That's all. That's what I confirmed at the meeting. So that is the part of the official record of the meeting, that having gone through the volunteer process, demographics were not collected when I went through the process.
Right.
So I can say, which is not currently being done, and then include your section.
So you could say which was not implemented, and then you could say and you could say, and it's unclear to the committee whether the subcommittee of the select board considered that recommendation. Because I don't think we didn't get a full clarity whether the timing of it, Roxanne, at our meeting, but if you want to follow.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that the timing of their report to us coincided, but certainly we had that report ahead of time. And we also had met over a period of time putting this handbook together, Ms. Bradley and myself, between the volunteer forms and that, and anything that was discussed, I mean, I wonder if it's in our minutes, but then the final product we brought to Freitag, and certain things he rephrased, certain things he took out, things like that. So, I mean, that's what I would say on that for now.
Look at the recording, because it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
We could just go back to get what was actually said.
For our last meeting, yes.
All right, so we'll do that for this and we'll defer the minutes, but let's go to the next, just so we have everything else covered. The next proposed edit. That was that. So then Regina.
Regina had two edits, one regarding summer use and traffic. Regina, could you expand on that? If there's a specific language you feel was ignored or?
It was, I just happened to remember that when we were talking about parking needs and the crosswalk, that someone mentioned that there was a difference between summer and non-summer school time use of the parking and the crosswalk, and that the studies being done now during the summer were going to be different. What I can't remember is where we landed in terms of, does it matter? Do we go forward with the data that we have and then conduct additional stuff? I just couldn't remember. I don't even know that it matters. It really was just an addition that I remembered as part of the discussion.
I don't recall any decisions being made, but it's a good point. I mean, I think we just referenced it as being an important conversation topic. That's how I remember it.
Yeah, to see the difference, yeah.
I thought that we didn't know when this was going to be, or when the study, the traffic information was actually from. So that we've just now gotten approval to do it. Is that right?
Well, so there's an additional study that Sky, our newest assistant town engineer, is working on putting together through UMass Dartmouth. That'll be in the fall.
So that's, that part of the minutes say you did your analysis and there's going to be. Doesn't say in the fall though, does it?
No,
It's a small
this-
thing. I'm not
This
overly
is-
worked up about that wording. I just thought it might jog somebody's memory and something might fall into place. But
No, I do remember talking about it. I do remember that issue being brought up, and I thought we had decided that it wasn't going to be, the traffic count wasn't going to be taken until the fall anyway, but maybe I could be misremembering that part, but
hey, at least you got a memory in there, Tabor. I don't have anything. And then the second thing that I did want to note and have in the record was that when we talked about asking folks why they moved to Milton, we expressed some interest in leveraging our wonderful local realtors to utilize their anecdotal evidence of why the people that are trying to at least buy homes, it doesn't help with renters necessarily, but at least people who are interested in buying homes, why they are moving to Milton. And I did want to make sure that that was included.
That was discussed at the very end.
At the very end.
Mhm. And that's my 2 cents.
So Regina, can you go back and take a look at the tape with respect to the question that we said we wanted to look at the tape about for the minutes?
I can. I'm actually fine with the minutes as long as we include that they weren't it wasn't implemented, and then we can come back to that later if you'd like. We can include it as an agenda item to re-report. You don't want me to do it now, do you?
No. But if people are
Update
comfortable
your-
with that, then
appropriate.
I think that's fine.
I'm absolutely fine with that.
okay. All right, then we can go ahead and
Motion to approve the minutes?
as amended.
Yes.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor, Regina,
Aye.
Tabor,
I,
Roxanne,
Yes.
Lauren,
Aye.
Dick,
yes,
Elaine,
I'm saying everything.
and Cheryl, yes. Okay. I think that's the longest we've had our discussion on minutes. Dick, we didn't even hear from you.
No comment.
All right. Town center planning discussion. We have Will Adamsick here. And we have some materials that were sent to us. And I guess really some of what we need to talk about is what we think our next steps might want to be with this. But let's pull up, Josh, the
Data?
beta work. Mhm.
Won't give anyone motion sickness by rotating the view while it's being prepared.
Okay.
So I can briefly speak to what Beta did. They went on site and tested 3 potential crosswalk locations. One at the start of the First Congregational Church's horseshoe driveway, one at the end of it, and then one on the far side of Milton's town hall's entrance. Their findings, based off of some of the best practices and distance from the original crosswalks, curvature of the road, their recommendation was that site 1, just off of the Lyra Bandstand in front of Town Hall, was the best location in terms of sight lines and in terms of distance from the existing crosswalks. That is sort of captured in a memo that's also in your shared materials that came around, I believe. And so that's the location where we would likely seek to develop a crosswalk. Director Zerwinski and I are working and getting this on the agenda for the Traffic Commission's next meeting, which is tentatively going to be on August 1st. It's not 100% committed, but that's when we're expecting that to be. So that'll go in front of the DPW director and the Traffic Commission for their review and consideration.
So what actually comes of that when it goes to them? What's being asked of them?
The Traffic Commission typically gives recommendations to the Select Board. So I imagine that is what would happen. But I've not developed a new crosswalk before. So I don't know exactly.
What's involved in developing a crosswalk?
So one of the considerations is what pedestrian safety measures are recommended, and the sort of more granular design of that crosswalk location. The memo that you all received recommended flashing beacons for the pedestrian crossing. We just this afternoon, actually, I put this in your folder, but we received some old plans from our town engineer related to the library at one point, which were only just unearthed recently. That included some preliminary design crosswalks at this location. So things like design of a granite bump out, what the traffic crossing signal would look like, and the wheelchair accessibility considerations.
Okay, what's the difference between Thatcher Street and what the proposed crosswalk is, and then going one step further, the distance between the crosswalk and Canton Avenue? I'm just thinking about people, the vehicular traffic going to hit the street, a traffic light and Thatcher, I got a traffic light at Canton Avenue, and we're putting in a sort of a flashing light in between. What's that's a fairly, I think is a fairly short area, isn't it?
Yes, it's the most sort of equidistant between the Reedsdale intersection and
I'm sorry, I mean Reedsdale is a road, I think. But okay, so it's equidistant, but what's the distance is between these?
Yeah, I believe it's in the report from Beta. I'll pull it up and just take that
The
specific.
crosswalk would be 450 feet south of the signalized intersection of Reedsdale and Center. Let me see. Yeah, the location number 1 provides the best available safe distance of the 3 alternatives, would experience the fewest impacts from up-street vehicle queuing on Canton Ave from the intersection of Reedsdale and Center.
I'm just concerned about the safety aspect of people. We were asking people to stop at a stoplight at that turn in Canton, and then all of a sudden they're coming up the hill, and all of a sudden they have a flashing light. And you know, the converse is also appropriate. They're coming up from Reedsdale Road. I just get a little concerned about that. That's such a short period of time. Someone goes through a light, and I don't know. I mean, if I can be convinced, I'm not convinced right now.
I think the current, like the existing condition is that they'd be surprised by a person crossing the street.
Right.
So maybe the beacon is better.
Yeah.
People look at it, they don't cross where they're supposed to cross right now, which is that's
So that's
right.
That seems like that was the request to us when we were
I
conducting
understand what the
this.
request was. I'm just asking, just in my
So
own.
Dick,
Yes.
I just measured it on Google Maps, which I don't know how accurate that is, but it's 1,161 feet from the Thatcher Street to Reedsdale Road.
Yes, from Reedsdale to the proposed crossing, it looks like it's about 600 feet from the nearest pedestrian
Well,
crossing.
it should be 500. So halfway mark would be someone 500 feet then from Thatcher to this proposed crosswalk, right?
Yeah, from the intersection, the closest pedestrian crossing at Thatcher, it's about 600 feet, and then from Reedsdale, it's about 460.
Okay, I'd be interested if the traffic commission comes up with something like this, because
So,
Member Malone has her hand raised.
okay, Regina?
I can't believe
I am by far no expert, but we've all driven and seen very different variations of crosswalks that try to take into consideration exactly what you're pointing out, Dick, which is a super important point, right? Whether it's a raised crosswalk or one with a flashing light, or one that has a dedicated stoplight, like whatever it is, I trust that the traffic commission or the engineers that are responsible for designing it have far more experience with this than I do to be able to make some really solid recommendations grounded in data, and traffic safety knowledge that surpasses anything that we could necessarily come up with on the fly. So I do hope that we can appeal to their expertise and understanding of all of the options that are available, and to come to some really safe and reasonable plans to implement.
One question I would have is if they are ready to make this recommendation without looking at what the impact on the two intersections would be. Personally, I do walk Canton Ave a fair amount, and to push the light as a pedestrian to cross the Thatcher intersection, you're standing there a long time. And so there, when somebody stands a long time, the tendency is to go when the light's not in your favor, right? It's not the pedestrian light because you. But one of the things we talked about with this was the youth, right? The youth coming from the high school and from the middle school, right? So I also think looking at these signals, I know from being on the planning board, changes to the signalization, at least at the Thatcher Canton Ave, was one of the things that was suggested by the traffic engineers. And I don't know what that would do to the intersection relative to crosswalks, but I do think it's worth asking. And I don't know if that's something that in part of our traffic mitigation discussion is there's going to be a consultant that's on call, basically. So if we can, what's the timing of that person that we thought might be a staff person? But if that person's going to be hired soon, then maybe this is a question for that staff person to be asked rather than the outside consultant.
Could be. I'm just saying, I agree with Regina on this. None of us are experts. I'm just raising this as a concern that I have, that I think should be put forward to whomever is going to design this. That I hate to have a situation where we go forward with a plan like this, and then some unsuspecting child, like we all know, kids will decide to go through it. Someone decides not to stop. And I don't think that is should end well. And I'm not trying to be a harbinger of bad news, but I'm just saying that it's something I'd be concerned about, because you have a very short area between the two lights, as you know so well. Those lights don't work all that quickly, and someone gets aggravated, they go through the light, and they're going to see this flashing light, and the kid's going to go out, diving out and going across the street for whatever reason, hopefully to go to the library and see, well, but the fact of the matter is, I want to make sure that that's really taken forward as to, because if it's not going to be totally safe, unless we can be convinced it's totally safe, I'm not sure it's a good idea.
Well, one of the things I think that had come up at one other point on our committee when Roxanne's predecessor, Arthur Doyle, was on, was whether a slower speed zone would be placed in this area between. One of the things we talked about was safety of the concerts out here with children running around. And the other thing is, if this crosswalk is aimed to help in the short term with library parking needs so that people could cross, the population is that would most likely be taking advantage of that are senior citizens and young families, right? So they're the ones that would be most vulnerable to maybe needing more time to cross the street. So they wouldn't be the ones darting, but they would be the ones that would be pushing the signal, I would think, and waiting for cars to stop.
Can we get some clarification from the company that did this, just to that point of, because there's also like the danger of not having a crosswalk and people crossing without a
Right.
crosswalk.
Well, we have that right now.
Right,
Mhm.
so we're like, you weigh that with,
Well,
you
yeah.
know, and just kind of get an understanding of like why the place isn't there or somewhere else, and is that enough distance, like to your point, it would be good to hear a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we have a situation now that people for all sorts of reasons don't seem to agree with, and I'm not saying I'm against it. I just want to make sure that when we have people who are experts in the field to help our Regina, myself on something like this, that they are cognizant of the fact that this is a concern about us. And that I think that's part of our purview and our role.
I
So I
agree.
would say-
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I would say if you're going as soon as August 1st to the Traffic Commission, it would be good to know whether the Traffic Commission will be working with this traffic engineer. I'm just going to say consultants for now, that will be engaged by the DPW and to evaluate things like this. And if so, what would the timing of that engagement be? Because otherwise, and I think we should ask Beta what it would cost to analyze these two intersections and the impact of this. And when they do it, consider the recommendations by the traffic engineers doing the memory care facility. Because we have not just memory care coming, we've got the 40B and we've got the Winter Valley. All will impact the intersection.
So 2 points. One is, I was reading an article probably within the past couple of weeks. It was sort of interesting. It was saying that pedestrian deaths are actually up and in crosswalks actually, which is sort of interesting. And then the other thing, which is sort of not a good thing, but the other thing is I would say the light at Thatcher, I believe that it's a little bit longer for the Canton Ave traffic because we don't also have that turn lane. So like if you're going to turn on to coming from Canton Ave to the library and you want to take a left on Thatcher, you'll end up waiting there forever to take the left unless somebody lets you go. So I think that that has been elongated a little bit on the Canton Ave and instead of the Thatcher side, just as a side note.
Well, I know that Ned Corcoran, who represents the memory care applicant, he remembers, as I do, since I've lived at my place for 25 years, that there was no light at that intersection. And, you know, he's commented that had favored more cut through because now you have a point at which there's a light and as many people who can get through versus having to stop there. So it would be interesting to ask about that as well, because having to come to a stop means people have to slow down instead of people I think one of the reasons crosswalks are dangerous, people now see a light and they gun it when they want to get through, right? They don't see yellow as a slowdown. But if you have a stop sign, you're forced to stop no matter what. There's no light for you to be trying to gun through. But I think, hopefully, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion from neighbors on those, what are called Adder Street, about Highland. But in any case, you know, there are changes coming to this corner in terms of development. So whether that would influence this crosswalk decision or not, I don't know, but it's worth asking.
Do we have an idea of what the volume is like crossing? Do we have any idea of that?
I don't have a number of crossings.
Just sort of curious if we're seeing a lot of crossings or there's certain peak times of the day. And I'm just wondering how that would coincide with like traffic volume. You know, like are you seeing them mainly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when kids are trying to cross over there? I'm just sort of curious.
Pedestrian crossing.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that.
Just interested in that.
One other thing that we discussed in the prior meetings was the sun glare. And I thought that was going to be addressed in this report. It wasn't. I don't know if that is an additional safety concern, and I think it's challenging to mount that hill, at some times during the year, and I think that's something we should definitely look at.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Especially during certain seasons.
Yeah, you're right. And that did come up last meeting. That was one of the qualifications.
Yeah, maybe they just didn't include it.
And I think I had also asked about evaluating whether 2 additional curb cuts across the street there would pose a traffic or safety issue. And if we could get either Beta or this new consultant to opine on that, I think that would be helpful for us. Will, did you have questions did you receive a copy of this or so? Okay, yeah, all right. And well, we have, Will, he did send us kind of, more abbreviated, I guess you'd say, summary of the library parking needs. Did folks have questions for Will while he's here?
Yeah, I had one quick question. Well, what time is the library closed?
The library is open until 9, Monday through Thursday. We close at 5 on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday we're open.
So when you have public meetings is one of the reasons to do something like this. The ones that I've been to, pretty much they end at 8:30. You give people a chance to, we have to go get a shut to go down. And that to me is, that means a meeting probably should start, it's gonna be a public meeting, probably should start at 6 o'clock. Does that sound right?
Yeah, most of our meetings start at 6:30 or 7, but if it's going to be a public meeting with comments and something larger, that would be 6 o'clock would be better. If it's a regular board meeting like this, perhaps
Right.
a little earlier.
I think we want to be clear about that, as what we expect from the library. And I think I'm glad to put it in there. I'm just thinking it's just sort of a narrow window in terms of the usage. That is one of the reasons to go forward with this. I think it's at least one of the least compelling of all the other ones that you have, quite frankly. Because the limited access to the library. I mean, this is generally, we don't even get warmed up until 8:30. So the fact of the matter is, you
Right.
talk about that as one of the reasons to go forward. I think I put that in there with that caveat that, it's for a limited time frame. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's, that's, I think I've heard it come up quite a bit when we're talking about a public forum and needing to conclude by 8:30 because,
Physical number,
yeah.
and I think that, the great space.
Yeah.
Everything you said about the facility is right on point and accurate. It's just a question, okay, it's time to wrap it up, that type of thing. And I wish some of the meetings I've been involved with could wrap it up by 8:30.
Yes.
That's not always the case.
okay. And then we had feedback that Bowler wouldn't be able to do. We just got the information via Josh that Bowler wouldn't be able to do cost estimating, but suggested that there's a couple of more construction related companies that could perhaps do cost estimating. So I guess, we thought that it was at our last meeting, it was worth getting an understanding of what it would cost to build parking on the other side of the street here. So continuing to do the due diligence, both on that and on this side. I would suggest that we see what it takes to get the estimates from those, what information they might need. They might not have enough information from that very preliminary kind of diagrammatic plan. What does the committee think? Should we seek to get that budget cost information
Well, I
via these
don't
other
know what we
consultants.
do without it. I mean, I
Right.
think that we've talked about the need will that.
Right,
Brought him through a number of times to, to make his case, and we totally appreciate that. And he's made the case. Now the question is, okay, now what does it cost and how are you gonna pay for it? Isn't that the next two steps?
Mhm.
Right, so until we figure out how to pay for it, we have to know what it's gonna cost.
yeah, it's just, whether there's enough information to determine the cost, like there's no engineering done on it. So, I mean, I guess I'm happy to have a conversation too, like I looked at the drawings that Will kindly provided for how they built the parking lot at the current library, which is similar construction. Because it's sloping down, they had to do this retaining wall, and also, what kind of assumptions might need to be made if it were going to be a building on top of it. But there will need to be some assumptions made, for that kind of ballpark estimate. So I think if we're all in agreement, then you can authorize Josh and I to have an initial conversation with these firms and see what it would cost and see what if you say if there's going to be some money involved, rather than waiting until September to approve the expenditure, let's approve it like up to a certain amount that it would cost us to get this cost information, that we would be authorized to do it, or he would be authorized to do it.
But without the number of what the the ballpark cost would be, what happens going forward? I mean, where does the conversation go from here? We've already pretty much decided, we've decided that we think this is a laudable and.
Yeah, so the question, Dick, really is, do we want to engage somebody to provide us with that estimate? They won't do it for free, I'm guessing. And so, given that we don't have a meeting until September, does the committee want to wait till September to move forward with an allocation, or do we want to say that we will authorize up to a certain amount, like tonight?
Well, if we get an estimate, then we'll get our idea. So what do you think? Some interest from a firm. I think there's probably more than one that does this type of work. And in terms of, go ahead.
So the two that were listed by Bowler were A.M. Fogarty and Associates, who did the pre-construction estimates at the East Milton Fire Station.
Okay.
And then W2 Rich Company, that they've done other projects.
Give us a ballpark estimate as to.
So they won't provide us a pre-construction estimate unless we pay them to do that, because that's work, right? Right, a pre-construction estimate is an involved consultant work. So I think what your guys is asking is, how much would you authorize us to pay one of these two companies to provide us with that pre-construction estimate?
Can I get clarification of what the scope is? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the library is looking for 40 to 60 spaces, right? And then if we put residential on top of this, or office space, how many more spaces is that going to be? So I just want to understand.
It's just the same. It's the same number of parking spaces. It's a question of how they get allocated. So that plan diagram had, was it 50 spaces, right?
Yeah, so I believe when we last left, it was that concept C that was provided to you all would be what, at least what Trader Guys was interested in getting that pre-construction estimate for.
It's the one that we talked about, the most recent one. You have it to call up? I see Tabor's hand.
And the estimate would be of just the parking element, not of any additional building on top.
My suspicion is, having been in this field of architecture for many years, is they're going to want some additional information to understand what they're estimating. But especially on the building. So it could be that we have this initial conversation and they say, here's what information we're going to need in order to provide you with an estimate, a meaningful estimate. Although, anybody can provide an estimate, right? If it's grounded in some meaning. And then we might have to engage someone to help us get that. But that's, I see, I just want to get to Tabor. There's the plan on the screen. Tabor, you've had your hand up. You want to please go ahead?
Sure. It's just as taking a page out of the school building committee's handbook here. No matter what they seem to be able to do now, they're having a really hard time making up for not having related to the public all of the investigative work that they did prior to selecting the Guile Road site, et cetera. And I'm just a little nervous that the whole town is going to be looking at why this, how did you come up with this? Not just the dollar amount, but all the details. So I do think it's well worth our while to pursue a full-blown estimate, as close as we can get to a full-blown estimate for the garage alone, the garage with residential above it, and maybe even another possibility of just decking the existing library parking lot. I mean, to show that we've worked to look at all these angles, because otherwise, it's, town meeting is going to be, very difficult to convince that we haven't done our homework. And I think we need, and as everybody's discussed, we're not engineers. It's not ours to decide. So it really does need to be done. And I think we do need to have somebody like a Bowler or what have you to go back on and say, these are the numbers as of that date.
To your point too, Tabor, I mean, we've talked about looking at all the options. So we did talk about whether there's any additional capacity here at town center. And because the engineering department had done a diagram, but it needs to be vetted through the public safety because of the, fire trucks coming forth. And so because the engineering was just an aerial view with some, like a PDF with some red marks, I mean, we could ask either this consultant engineer or again, either Beta, probably Bowler, to take a look at town center to see if there's any capacity at town center. That's just continuing to see what the options are.
Everybody's going to look at that green space and say, we could put at least another 10 parking and another 25 parking spaces, whatever the number is. And, unless we prove them wrong, they're going to be right. But we just have to be careful and come up with the excuses ahead of time that we've investigated all these things. And I think we're pretty sure that a lot of these things aren't worth pursuing because we do want to make sure that we maintain the green area around the gazebo. We've got safety issues with fire engines coming and going, et cetera. But I think it needs to be said by an engineer who studies this for a living.
A member of Camden Lawn Concern, please.
Regina?
Yeah, Tabor, I love that you put that into the context of what we just recently went through, where a lot of volunteer time and effort and energy and dare I say, time and effort that equaled expertise, right? Went into developing a plan, and that there certainly was some, last minute coming of awareness to the situation that made people wonder, like, well, wait a minute, how do we get here? I think one, that's inevitable in a civic context. But I do absolutely agree with you, Tabor, that documenting and communicating the process is an important aspect of getting people to understand and appreciate the plan that is being presented. I think it makes a strong case for a part-time communications expert hired by multiple towns to be able to help seal the deal, and know how to share that stuff and be great with graphics and other things like that. I just want to go on the record as saying that. But you're absolutely right that documenting the way forward is important, and documenting all of the sidearms that you ruled out along the way is even more important.
Okay, so it sounds like we want to get some idea for a proposal from at least one or two of these consultants for what they would charge to do a cost estimate. And then we can talk about that, authorizing that in September.
What's your cost estimate for your cost estimate?
And then also to see whether this new engineering consultant or Bowler can take a look at the area around Town Hall and see if there's additional parking capacity there. So if it's Bowler, what would that cost, right? So, so that would be two kind of proposals that we would have available for September, we hope, right? And in addition, that would either be a third, which would be some additional work on the crosswalk, which would be these signalized intersections at a minimum, right? So we would need to know the dollars for that, and then who would do each of these, right?
I know that like the parking is something that we all agree on, and that is like we figured out what parking is a need, the parking we want. But as far as like additional on the property, like this is, I just wonder if there's something that we want to open up to the community in terms of like, do we want to put housing? Do we want to make it another teen center? Do we want to have a cafe? Do we want to, like, because we can have them create 4, 5, 10 estimates, but I feel like maybe we should narrow down really what it is that we want them to estimate.
I think the cost for building the building will be in a scope of, or a range. We can give a range for the type of uses that could be, and then at least we're getting a little information, because if you go to somebody and you say, would you like a new community center? Would you like a new use, without any idea of how much it would cost? Then it's, you know, people will say, yeah, that sounds great, but how much would it cost? So I think if we had some idea about the construction costs could be on it, it could be beneficial to that conversation. It is part of a larger discussion of planning a town center that we do, I think, you know, want to have too. And one of the things I wanted to mention is, because I'm now serving on the Community Preservation Committee, there's an application by the town administrator to rebuild the basketball court in the green space next to the construction project. And so we had talked when MAPC did some consulting work with us, we had talked about that green space and whether there was some opportunity for intergenerational use of it. And I understand from the presentation made to that committee that the Council on Aging has classes that then they use that basketball court, and then youth use it as well. And so if there's additional, I think there's additional work that was going to need to be done when the fire station is completed with their construction, because their staging area goes almost all the way over to the basketball court itself. So the question then becomes, again, sort of how broad, if you look at the master plan itself and it talks about town center, there's lots of ideas thrown out about what town center could be. So do we want to kind of get back into that planning, kind of larger planning that we were doing with MAPC? And with these different pieces that we've been talking about, you know, factored in. And then that would entail a public process for sure, Elaine. I guess what we wanted to do is kind of keep in mind that the library has come to us and asked for some assistance, because they've been working on trying to get parking for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I kind of hate to have it get sort of put into a process that extends that a very long time again, you know, because some of these other things might be a very long time out.
Yeah.
So, you know, this idea that we could assist with a sort of shorter term help in this area, which, you know, because it wouldn't be such a reach of doing something across the street. So it seems to me, if we stay a little bit focused on the parking and the crosswalk aspects of it, maybe at least for another meeting or two, so that we can then think about how that fits into a larger planning context for the town center. Does that make sense? We have Mike Zulis here, who's, I don't want to have him wait too long. We can come back to this conversation if we want to just confirm what we all agree we're doing next on it. But we could So we could table this and go to number 6, which is the traffic mitigation. But I just want to give Will one last opportunity while he's here to make any comment for us.
Sure, thank you. I'll just say it was, for the library trustees are committed to helping to move the project forward. So once you get the cost estimate, I'm sure the trustees will be able to supply some of the funding for that process as well. And we waited for it's on the agenda and we'll see this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will.
All right.
I will.
So you have September 8th on your,
I do.
no, it's okay.
Goodness.
Okay, so we'll come back to 5 to just sort of recap that, but Mike, please come on up.
I don't know where to go.
Okay, you're not roasting in here with the rest of us.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to try now one where
That's fair work.
probably does. So it's probably a little.
We might have an inch of dust up there on each.
Start coughing away. See what back there?
There you go.
Oh. That one was last
Warren,
time.
Nothing yet.
Papers start flying around.
That's right. Look at this. It's full already. Okay, good.
Right next to you.
All right, there. All right. So since Mike gave us a minute here to recap, can you read back to us, Josh, what we agreed our next steps are? So we don't have to wait till the minutes come out.
So Treasurer Geis and I will do some initial outreach to at least AM Fogarty and Associates and WT Ridge Company about some pre-construction cost estimates at 40 Highland Street, as well as reach out again to Bowler and to Beta to see additional parking capacity at the town center site.
And then on the crosswalk, the intersections, you have that in the notes?
So yes, so there's a question if the traffic commission will work with the new engineering consultant to identify safety considerations at those intersections, and if not,
Well,
we would again engage Beta.
right. So I think what we understand is we think that we want to make sure that we understand the impacts on the intersections. If there's a lot of pushing of a light across Canton Ave, what will that do to those two intersections?
Mhm.
All right, so Regina, Tabor, does that sound right? Regina, you say 1 minute? Okay,
Yes, I think we need to make sure that all three intersections, the crosswalk for the middle and Highland or Thatcher and Reedsdale have to be connected. I mean, that they all got to be studied as one.
and then I think there was this point about how far you cross. And one way that is made less is to have a bump out, so like where the parking spaces are, you'd actually have a curb come out where the crosswalk is so that nobody can fly up those parking spaces to the crosswalk, number one, right? So, and then it reduces the crossing distance. Right,
Yeah.
Josh, that's a sort of a strategy, I guess, I've seen used, so we could ask about that as well.
Yeah, the design we got from.
Yeah, without interfering for bike traffic.
Mhm.
The design we got from engineering included the granite ones out
Okay,
on the Canton Ave side.
all right, so the question that Warren raises is make sure there's no impact on the bike lane.
This would be reviewed by traffic mitigation committee too, just in
It's
case.
traffic commission.
Traffic commission,
Yeah.
which includes public safety.
Public safety, DPW.
Okay, all right. So they would.
Yeah, because I was thinking of like when you're plowing,
Right,
and we were just talking about emergency vehicles, things like that. then look at that.
Okay, so now my thanks for coming and joining us, especially in person. I know you had another meeting tonight too, so thank you. And making time for us.
No, happy to do it, and this is pleasant now.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you and Dick for your work on the traffic mitigation committee, and Dick had mentioned that for your leadership on it, which was pushing it or suggesting the committee in the first place. But now, one of the things we're trying to do with the master plan is decide, about whether it should be updated. So we're trying to do an assessment of what's been done. Is there still work to be done? And so traffic is something everybody hears about all the time, right? It should not just be traffic, but transportation, right? But traffic is what people focus on. So anyway, take it away in terms of you and Dick.
So, do you want to start? So there is still work to be done. There's still a lot of work to be done, and a lot of work in this report that could be done, and I think it can be done now because for two reasons. One, we town meeting appropriated money for two community service and traffic enforcement officers. And two, as I understand that there might be money for the dedicated traffic engineer or at least a consultant, those are two recommendations that are in this report. And in addition to some low hanging fruit that we have, like do not block the box and some other things that we were able to accomplish, there were some bigger ticket items. And so if we had a chance to look at the report, what we did was to identify 8 hotspots in town. And there are things that we continue to talk about today, right? And very pointedly, including the Route 28 corridor. I mean, those are things that we addressed 3 years ago and made recommendations. Some of these hotspot areas, for some of those, there were specific recommendations for what to do. And for some of them, they were a little bit more general, such as you have to get a community group together for Wood Street, for example, get a community group together from people in the area and see how we can improve it. Because the traffic mitigation committee, what we did was through public meetings and the wiki map that we had on the website, basically collected information, right? And about where the problems were, and tried to recommend kind of in an overview way how to respond to those problems. But for some of the specific items, for some of the specific trouble spots, those really need more analysis and more study. So what my view is that now if we have a consultant and a traffic engineer, that traffic engineer can work with the town administrator to really drill down on each of these trouble spots to try to improve things. There's a couple of let me see if I can pull up a couple of examples here. Let's see, 28 corridor, we all know what's going on there. We recommended the corridor study back then, because everyone was, and now it's finally being done, a little bit late, but it's being done. Traffic enforcement, the changes to the traffic commission we recommended, some of those we made with some effect, I think some effect. For example, we made some recommendations on Wood Street and East Milton Square, including stop signs in Washington Street and speed limit signs, electronic enforcement signs, which we do have some of those around town. So if you go through each of these 8 areas, and again, I'm hopeful of a consultant working with the town administrator and traffic commission to go down on each of these and probably try to drive some improvements there. I think that would be useful. There's a couple of overarching policy things that could also be driven, and that is we recommend the parking benefit district in East Milton Square. That's something that hasn't been done yet that we can consider.
Excuse me, what was that, a parking?
It's called a parking benefit district, and it's under Mass General laws, and it basically allows for parking revenue. right? And to put that back into the square. Now, big question whether you want to do that, right? But there was a view of the mitigation committee that we could better manage the resources in the commercial district, and we could also raise the revenue to do so if we did parking benefit district. The other big ticket item that we recommended was Vision Zero, which we haven't done. Boston has done, and Vision Zero is basically it's a national program to achieve a highway system with no fatalities or serious injuries for road traffic. And and if you adopt that, then you're making a statement, right? And then you try to feed into that statement you're making. We're a Vision Zero community, and our policies need to be focused on that. That's something that the committee recommended. And something that I think we should consider. So I think there are some specific things with respect to the A-travel spot, and there are also in general. And I'll stop there and let my esteemed colleague.
I want to begin by thanking Michael for listening to me a little bit, and he and I both agreed that traffic is one of the regional overarching issues affecting the town of Milton for all sorts of reasons. It makes Milton a great place to live. It makes it very easy to cut through to get there to downtown Boston. I think it may change going forward, but we'll see how that works out. But a couple of things to think about, I think it's probably a good time to revisit a very good report that was generally accepted by any and everyone we brought it to before the planning board, the board of selectmen, and others, is that we still have to start with the fundamental. And you and I and others on the committee, we had a very long and robust discussion about very similar to what we're doing here tonight. Who has responsibility for the implementation of this report? And we had a long discussion with what we didn't want to do. And I think every member of the committee agreed on this. We didn't want to have a report like this that sits on the shelf. Right? No, everybody's busy, everybody has things to do. And if it's important, then it's important. And if it's not, then it's not. And I think we all agreed that it wasn't important. So we still have to come to grips with who has responsibility. And I think there was some disagreement, and again, a good disagreement as to who should be responsible, who has responsibility in implementing this plan. Not to get into the details, but I think that still has to be determined. We also had a really good conversation, and everyone didn't agree, obviously, but what's the role of the traffic commission? I think I'm not going to speak for Michael, but I think that I wanted the traffic commission to be more proactive. As opposed to and as opposed to reactive. And the way it works right now is the traffic commission meets, and I just found out 2 minutes ago that 2 hours ago, I guess now, that there may be a traffic commission meeting coming up on August 1st. It shouldn't be something that I have to constantly go through the list of public meetings to find out when that commission is going to meet, what's on the agenda. And if you're going to be on that commission, my view is the things that people are going to be coming to shouldn't be a surprise to you. These are issues like the Wood Street extension is a classic example. I mean, does the traffic commission wait for someone to come to them before they act? Are we going to talk about making a move in parking, move a parking spot here, parking spot there? There's some big macro issues that I think deal with safety, quality of life, and just in general living in the town of Milton. So I think those two in particular, Michael, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we still have to figure out who's in charge. I mean, if I have a question about a traffic issue, do I call the planning department? Do I call the town administrator? Do I call DPW? Do I call the police department? Who do you call when you have an issue or something like that? And who is responsible? And once you receive that call, make sure the other interested parties know about this. And I'd like to see some more proactive sort of planning as to deal with this, rather than ask people to say, hey, take some time out of your day or your night. Well, remember, you had it from the day, and now we have them at night anyways. So if you bring forward an issue, and then And then what's the end of it? You bring it and they say, okay, we're gonna commit a study. Well, who's gonna study it? Who's gonna get that deal? When's there's gonna be some sort of determination? These are the things that I think gnaw on people, and the issues don't go away. You maybe not hear them as vocally as you'd like. The people, not banging the table, but I think if you talk to anyone that's done this, some overreaching issues, we talk about airplane noise, but traffic is certainly, and some other things we can certainly talk about, but traffic is certainly there. It affects all of us. And it's not going to get any better. We have a lot of things going on in this town. And I would just like to see, to deal with, Michael and I have been talking about this ad nauseum, but in terms of getting to the point where who's in charge? Do we want to put together a traffic mitigation plan group like this that has that responsibility? Remember, there was some people adamantly against doing that. They said, no, it doesn't belong with the group, it belongs to one individual. Now, has that changed? Could it change? Is it effective? So I think those are the types of things, either we're going to do something or we're not going to do something with traffic. And I just don't think where we are right this minute is really getting us where we need to go. Right? I mean, there's a lot of things, we can go through all of these things, and there's some of them, and we've talked about this, some of the things that we need federal approval and cooperation with, we need state approval, we need, joining communities, a collaboration with, but there's things we can do ourselves.
But that kind of thing is in the master plan too. That kind of thing came out of our work in Milton Village. And who's in charge isn't really, I think, the key thing, right? Like in Milton Village, Dick, remember, the former town administrator did reach out to Boston because there was a recommendation to work on the signal, to make changes to the signal across the river in Boston side. If none of these things happen, the planning work, the issues that get raised during the zoning and planning stages, when a project comes forward, if nothing's been done on those recommendations, then it's hard for people to be supportive of the projects because the comments about what needs to be done aren't being done, right? So even if you have a running record of, if projects take capital funding and therefore there's going to be a pipeline of them, what's the pipeline, right? There should be a strategic plan to the pipeline of projects. And then what are the funding opportunities for them, right? So.
But some of these right now is administrative, right? I mean, we can get into all that as we work our way down. But who do I go to? And I know this town as well. Who do I go to if I have a traffic issue? Who do I go?
No, I understand that completely. It's like when changes have been made. I mean, this is one of the things that I often wonder too. The traffic commission would put up a do not enter sign certain times, and then who studied the impact of that? There's been no study. And every time the planning board reviews a project, I just mentioned we're reviewing the memory care facility. Well, there's recommendations that are coming from that work that need study by someone. So if they're not necessarily traffic generated by the project, but they're traffic in the neighborhood that the neighbors are already concerned about. So they don't want not one additional piece of traffic because they're not getting anything done about what they are concerned about with the existing traffic. So I do think that studying the recommendations, because fixing a problem, it's like you're going to take the same number of cars that are going this way now, and you're going to close a few different options. They're going to go on the other options that are open, right?
So that's an important point, and that's one of the things that when we did this, we were first getting the beta software, which does traffic modeling. So, but to Dick's point, there's no one that really owns that, right? There's no one that owns. So we have the capability to be able to model out what will happen if we do something in a particular area, but nobody owns it, right? And so that was the idea. And this group was we need a traffic engineer who can own the beta software that we have. And if there's an issue, if someone wants a stop sign, right, what are the impacts going to be? Let's model it out, right? So I think you're exactly right. The question is, where does the study go? To me, it's the planning department's the traffic engineer with using the beta software for something like that. But then you have the bigger projects, like if you're gonna do a stop sign down, stoplight down in Milton Village. And it's, which we also recommend, right? But that's $800,000, right? So there's different levels of, to your point, there's a project level, right? But there's also kind of a smaller targeted thing, smaller targeted projects that you can just say, okay, we have the software, we have the engineer, we have the consultant. I'm sorry to point, I don't mean to point you, Josh.
No, there wouldn't be in our department.
Yeah, we have the capability to test out what are the impacts of that going to be.
Yeah, and I think, they do brought the whole economic development, but I think you agree with the economic development aspect of this. So we get the safety aspect and the.
Don't forget them, but.
No, I mean, but in terms of all these things that come up and you watch it saying, and you'd like to say, we're not gonna have to deal with this whole project. Well, we know that's not the case. So the idea is saying, where's all the traffic going to go? Where's it going to go? I mean, I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I had a conversation with someone who worked in the town and no name being used or even the department. And they said part of the job is to get traffic through the town as fast as possible. Made perfect sense to him. It didn't make perfect sense to me and other people said, no, that isn't what we want to do. People have ways. It's a very the quickest way of putting it and saying, hey, let's come through Milton and go to wherever I have to go. And one of the things that's near and dear to my heart that I'm going to is that we get traffic coming down a street that I grew up on in Pleasant Street, and this traffic is going down on a steady stream by 2 elementary schools. Are you serious? We are funneling people by 2 elementary schools, in town. And so I think those kinds of discussions have to be made. You're not going to make everyone happy. What Mike said in terms of, are we going to put, put parking meters on East Mill Square? I don't know, but that should be part of a conversation. Are we going to give out more tickets? There was, not too long ago, someone told me, said, we don't want to give tickets. This wasn't recently. In East Mill, Milton Village, that we can check us to Milton residents. Well, if someone's tying up a parking spot for 8 hours, I don't care where he lives. You have to press the ticket, you get the car out of it, you get another car in there, which is good for the economic development of our one central business district. So I think there's all sorts of things, and I think that it might help. I know I haven't asked him yet, but that this is coming, that we'll find someone who will be identified, hopefully with Roxanne's help, on the board. You're in charge. This is a job. You might not like it. This might not be in the original job description, but this is something that you have responsibility for. So when something, it shouldn't be the traffic commission should meet on a regular basis, in my opinion, so I don't have to, scroll through and find out when they're meeting. And things that should be dealing with issues we're all talking about, but we don't need someone actually to walk in and say, hey, I need you to put a stop sign on the corner of my street because people are heading through, right? So I think that's where we are. I think we have a good base. We have this beta consultants. We have the software that we've had for a number of years, and now we have hopefully someone to implement that. And let's see what happens.
So what I would say too, sorry, Elaine, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say this is so helpful to hear and learn about some of the things that you guys have recommended in the report. And I think it makes me think that it really does speak to that we should be looking to update the master plan because it reflects some of these things that you have in this report.
We will in 2 years, right? And that's what we have by statute.
Actually, we have about a year.
Okay.
To make a recommendation on, within that. So what I was going to suggest is that I agree with you about an entity, whether it's a person or an entity, being at least knowledgeable about every proposed change. So for example, like I'm sitting here and I know about the memory care facility and I know about what we're talking about on Canton Ave. Is there anybody in town hall, the planning department knows, but if this lies in the engineering department, do they know? So there's going to need to be some kind of a communication tool because, let's just say somebody made a went forward with a recommendation on one of these projects without considering, and that might impact this crosswalk, or it might, I'm just using these two because they're front of mind right now, but it could be any project anywhere.
That was the idea of the beta software. Any project,
Yeah.
you can plug it in and just see what's gonna happen.
So there should be, that, if I thought it was gonna be a staff person, but we got confirmation from the DPW, it's gonna be a consultant. As long as that consultant staffs it with the same person, I think if they don't, and it's just somebody new plugging it in, you're not going to develop the kind of knowledge base of Milton that you'd want there. So I'm hoping that will be worked out in the engineering
Think
department.
how much time that would save you, Cheryl, on the planning board, if you had the software and the person implementing the software, and you deal with 4 or 5 minute out. How many times did you get the same?
How many times have I heard the same information, at least on this hearing going on right now about traffic, every single meeting, every single
That's right.
hearing, we hear the same thing about the traffic. And I'm not discouraging people from saying that they have a problem, but it's a tool that this committee helped fund how many years ago?
19, 2008, maybe?
We requested that money. We requested that funding because we thought it was really important to get that model built, and here we are, still not being able to use the model. And, I actually said on the planning board on the memory care, I said, I'd love to see you use the model and model these proposed changes.
Why roll in a good discussion some data?
But, in people's perceptions too, if my perception when my kids were in school was I'd leave my place and come out Canton Ave and say, Canton Ave is horrible. I can never get out. I can't go right. I can't go left. But my perception was based on leaving at the time I left every single day, 5 days a week. Now I leave at a different time. My perception of Canton Ave could be different, right? Because my time frame of using, that's where the data comes in. The data comes in because each person's individual experience is based on their own schedules, right? It's not based on, something that takes the big picture look. So anyway, I love having that model be used all the time and keeping it current. So a new project comes in, the traffic data. So like we have traffic reports from the 40B, and we have it from the memory care, and their projections of what's going to be produced, by those projects. That's not in the current model because those projects are new.
Right.
So if we wanted to model some changes right now in Canton Ave, we'd have to make sure that that proposed project gets put in there. And who's going to be the knowledge person to make sure that consultant knows it? That's where departments have to be talking to one another, planning department and DPW or engineering.
Like the first. Is that inside?
That's my suggestion.
I'm curious, this is the first time I've learned about this, and I'm excited that we're getting somebody on board to do this kind of work. As an outside consultant, though, how can we guarantee that they're working in the best interest of Milton? Because if they're working for the developer that's also putting in the project, how does the town?
Beta's only working for Milton right now, as they're not, I think they'd have a conflict coming in on any project team because they have a contract with the engineering department. So they do peer review for planning board. They did the peer review.
I think for ZBA work.
Yeah.
For the school.
So they're like our town consultants. Yeah. But it would be great to have clarity about how this is going to work since that is funded now, that position. So the question about who's going to work on it, who's responsible for it, how does information get fed in from the traffic commission reports to planning department work to complete streets and traffic, the bicycle pedestrian master plan. All these things affect, presumably affect traffic too. It's to me like maybe it's DPW that has responsibility for all of those things. But when we, when DPW reports out at town meeting, it's very short. I don't know if they report to the select board on this kind of bigger planning on these things, but.
See, I think the DPW is operational. I think it's planning.
Okay.
I think to me, it's negligent. And Tim, I know that, he was very enthusiastic about this.
Yeah, I think I think I'll leave it up to the select board, to come up with their recommendation.
Whenever it says something like that,
And I would be very happy with that decision was made, as long as there's the decision to say they're very fundamental. If I have a problem, we go. And that's pretty simple.
Good point. I mean, I think DPW is important too, though, in this whole thing, because they have a lot to do with a lot of these things that go in, whether it's signage or, accounting for, traffic. They put in like the different signs and different things like the speed signs and so forth. So I do think there's a big part with DPW too.
Well, when they do their repaving projects and they do sidewalks,
Right.
Is a bump out something that's considered or not, as a pedestrian safety improvement, or is the width considered based on, the wider the road, if it's striped for the bike? I mean, there's all sorts of things that should be considered, but I don't know what guides them other than if it's in one of these plans, what guides them and who has considered all these plans. There's a lot of plans.
It could be a three-headed monster.
Yeah.
It could be, Milton and Chase. Maybe that's.
I kind of think it makes sense that way because there's things that aren't in the planning department's budget or purview that, and it is multi-department, really, right?
Yes, I mean, and I think the hope with the traffic commission that Chase and Tim are both on.
Yeah.
Jack Calabro does our traffic signal light, but that is the sort of interdepartmental venue. And I think, as Dick would say, there's a lot of room for improvement and
Yeah, I think it's fair, and I think it's fair. But I do think that, it's something that should be, user friendly as a resident, number one. But I do think if we get, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, because I get a little foggy, we had about 7 o'clock meetings.
7 a.m.
7 a.m. was wonderful for me, but as we talked about it, I think that the former town administrator made a very impactful, not plea, but a case that he should be the person who is responsible, have responsibility for the implementation of the plan, given that planning, DPW, police, whoever else would be involved, report up to him, to the board, right? And I think, we had that discussion, it wasn't a quick discussion, and I think that's the one where we sort of at the time, I think everyone sort of said, hey, this makes sense, as long as someone has that responsibility and that charge. And if it's not going to be the town administrator, then I'm going to leave it up to the select board to tell us who that particular person is.
And then that feeds into, something I was taught very early in my career by a superior, which is the superior always said he always wanted one throat to choke. one throat to choke. So it's always good to have one throat to choke.
Yeah, and I think, that my thing, we're going to do this, the work it through the office, and that I think that hopefully, next time we want to chat, if we're doing all is that you'll say, hey, listen, this is the perfect. This is the call. This is the perfect.
Yeah, stop emailing me.
No, that's right, exactly.
I think it would be helpful to report out progress too, not, on any plan. Like this has this committee that can report out progress, but we have to do a lot of outreach to get the information to be able to report it out, right? But like on that, it would be, and then let people know. Like if there was a section on the website about, traffic, and the people could get to the report, and here's the contact person, and then if they had quarterly report, that they could get that quarterly report there, then it would save all the emails that some people might get, or the phone calls, or the frustrations that residents have.
And we had a wiki map before.
That's right.
We had it all the time. We
Right.
had that prominent before where people made complaints, and we got a lot. We got about 350.
It was amazing.
We got a lot of response.
And that's why I think we both felt bad about this, that we asked people we asked them for their opinion and their thought, and we haven't dealt with it.
Well, this is like,
Right,
when
yes.
people did the master plan, we had this, sessions and we'd have people participate. And then, East Milton Square has had planning done for 20 years, and I don't know how many plans there are. We pulled them up on the planning board and in this committee, and, another plan, people want to see action. They don't want to see plans that sit on the shelf more. And that's why I said, I think if the information is at least available, then people can be pointed there and they see who they can reach out, who's the right person to reach out to get the latest data. I saw that we have a new website now.
Yeah, it just started, yeah.
It's experiencing some growing pains.
Yes.
Yeah, that was problematic for me earlier.
Okay, that's what you meant, Regina.
I lost not knowing when my yard was being.
Well, yeah, last week was a whole, yeah.
But I couldn't find the count, like I'm used to going to the calendar feature and it's not present at all. You had to find the committee or whatever government entity you were looking for in order to track down the next meeting. I don't know. Maybe there's
The event calendar is on that one page. If you just keep scrolling down.
It's down there. I don't know about a different format. I did it on my desktop, but if it's on the phone, sometimes
It's harder on the phone to do.
harder on the phone.
Definitely.
It becomes really long.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was on the desktop. I didn't see it, but I'll take a look. Thank you.
Tabor and Regina, did you have any questions or comments for Dick and Mike?
My
Oh,
only comment would
God
be
bless you.
kudos to both of them. Go ahead.
Kudos. He said kudos to both of them. Okay.
Yeah, I think the wiki map was a great idea. And it was one of those things that everybody complains about traffic and nobody does anything about it. And here's your opportunity. And I talked to a number of people about it who hadn't heard about it and were satisfied that they were at least out there pushing buttons. So now that we've gotten the people to do the button pushing, I think it's important to follow that up with some kind of result and report, incorporate that. So.
Yeah, I mean, this, we had the driver of this report was the former Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth, Jeff Mullen.
Mhm.
And so, we don't want to waste this. Because he did a lot of work on this, a lot of good, I mean, we all did, but Jeff did a lot of work on it. So,
But I think, if you want to get people involved, if you want to get, you're asking for their input and then you take it and you don't respond to it, or you ask people to sit on a committee and put something together and it doesn't implement it, it's just going to be more and more different. You got people to participate in our form of different side of government. So, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And I said, we're not going to make everyone happy. There are going to be some people that will have to have some issues, which is fine. And that's part of a good discussion, I guess. But let's see if we get some of these things done.
Well, like when I suggested, like at that point on the website, if like the Route 128 study, right? You can at least have a link to the study. You can have, other information about the public meetings that have been held, right? And so right now there's bits and you have to, if you are interested in something, you have to really do a lot of digging to find things that are interrelated. So that communication, I don't know, somebody said something about Tabor, maybe about communication. I think, Dick, to your point, that all comes back if you participate in something, you want to see something done, it's the communication piece of it that gives people the sense that something.
Yeah, you might not get what you want, but at least get the idea that you had it for them. You had to make a point and something happened, right? And I said, I think nothing more frustrating to me is to see an issue and people talk about the issue and nothing is done about the issue. They don't look at the rest of the town as we can, and then I don't think that's the case at all. I think
You
you
know-
know, it's just a question of we have the information, let's see what we can implement, maybe not everything, at least some of it. And show us in the right direction.
Something that I think would be interesting is to see if what's the deck project promised in terms of improved public safety is actually being realized with the new signals and the crosswalks and so forth. It's like in architecture, when they call it post-occupancy evaluation, you go in and see if the building is performing the way it was designed to, and whether it's meeting the needs of the client in the way that it was anticipated it would, and if not, then you have opportunity to correct it. So that would be interesting to see, because, you know, we as a town kept hearing for a long time that that project was going to really help East Milton Square, right? So it'd be interesting to do, you know, a post-construction evaluation to see how it's working. Not the anecdote, but, you know, the engineering analysis.
I love that idea.
And the latest that I heard from Chase, this is probably a month ago, was that the timing of the signalization hasn't really worked, was still getting worked in. And I don't know if it's an accumulation of data. I think it may be an accumulation of data. So that hasn't, he said it would take another month or so. I'm not sure about a month ago, but maybe kind of, I'm not sure what's kicking in yet. So that apparently still has, if it's kicked in, it's very good,
Okay.
according to, you know. what-
Yeah, it would be interesting too, when schools start, if parents feel safe for their kids to get to, you know, Cunningham and Caldecott or East Milton. Because that was one of the things there that we talked about, right? So,
That's pretty important. I mean, if you have a child, the person can't make it from Andrews Park up to Kennedy Park,
Well, let's not
or
forget-
being killed, then it's not really working. I was,
no, let's not forget that people talk about people cutting through Milton, but Miltonites generate a lot of their own traffic. If you don't feel safe for your child to get or walking on bike too close for a bus, they're probably going to drive, right? And there's many instances, you know, when people are choosing to drive because of the safety factors or possibly time factors. But this, you know, like with the state routes to school, I think that program's called. You know, those I think made a big difference over at Glover and Pierce, yeah. Yeah, but Pleasant, you know, that there's like, what, 1,000 kids there or something like that in those two schools. So,
little kids,
yeah,
you know, they're fifth graders,
Yeah.
K-5, they're the children, and we're funneling, almost overly funneling traffic down.
well, one of the challenges that, you know, Milton has is there are really only a few streets that go certain places to, if you want to get from like a point A to a point B, right? Like if you're coming from, let's say, like I always think of Canton, of course, because that's my experience, but everybody has their own personal experience. But there's only, you know, how many streets that you could go from, you know, out by the Eustis Estate to get to East Milton, right? So, you know, once you begin to, I mean, that's another thing to think about when you think about where new development might be, is what roads can handle it, whether it's private development or town, like a town school or.
Some of the streets in this town get an all time, they were not designed to handle the volume of traffic, and I think people are talking about Pleasant Street, but if you have traffic that goes south for trackuses and bumper to bumper every evening, right, up to St. Elizabeth's, that was never really the intention. That goes back to when I talked about with the Wood Street extension. As to, that's something that we should really kind of take a look at. And we are encouraging people to get off their expressway, to get off of Wood Street, and come up that Hill Road, and go up to Randolph Avenue, to go wherever they're going. And I would think looking at it, I would say somehow that word is getting out. This is a pretty good customer, and you know that's us. Can we do anything about it? I have no idea. This is what a lot of people that I am in terms of being engineers and architects, and lawyers like Michael, but they come up with a good way of doing it. And I think that once we take a whack at it, I don't know what else we should be spending our time on, quite frankly.
Well, if you look at the economic development opportunity aspects of the traffic that you spoke about, like East Milton Square and Milton Village being recent planning initiatives, and East Milton Square, we have MAPC engaged to do work there now. And we need to evaluate how that's working in East Milton Square, because if we're going to talk about new zoning, people living in East Milton Square, we heard it with 440 Granite Ave, existing traffic conditions. We have such limited places in our business district, they're very small. And so we have to follow through on the recommendations and then test them to see how they work. So we have to follow through in Milton Village with the traffic light and with even they said the signalization at Adams and Elliott, which is us, which is not Boston, and it's not a new traffic light, that signalization there, so that right now, if a pedestrian pushes the button, it stops all traffic. And they said that there were things that they could change about how that intersection functioned. I think not for big dollars, but like I've been on the committee long enough to know about the reports that have been done. Josh said he pulled up a plan that he just received. Well, I received that a few years ago and it's in the folder. The more we have different people on committees and, staff, we need a central place so that continuity continues, so that when Mike and Dick aren't following up on traffic anymore, somebody else knows that plan exists and they know that there's an implementation plan and it gets handed over to the next set of people. It doesn't rely on our institutional memories, right? All right, well,
Thank you very much.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope we can do more with this, because I think there's more we can do. I hope we can do more.
Great, thank you.
That's a promise from him, right?
It's not a promise, it's a directive.
Michael, you're the one next.
All right, well, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Good night.
All right, the 2 meetings ago, everybody agreed to take a piece of the plan and talk about, I think what we wanted to do was kind of make sure that we spoke about all the high level topics, right? So we spoke about sustainability, we spoke about DEI, we just spoke about traffic, right? And so, everyone said, I'll take a piece of this. So if you want to take maybe just a few minutes from everyone to kind of give each of us your thoughts. And then I thought what we could do, I think Elaine had suggested this, is plan out the next agenda a little with those in mind, right? So I would at least like to suggest that in September we talk about housing, because we're likely to have MBTA community zoning, kind of coming forward. And I just think it's, housing is a big, important topic in the master plan. And I don't think the committee should just sit out discussion of the MBTA community because of that. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, so,
Agreed.
all right, so September will be housing. So I'm going to look at Warren because he had reached out to me.
Yeah, so I know the minutes it said circulation,
But you were economic
but
development.
I'm interested in doing the economic development if that's
Right.
okay. I really enjoy that kind of stuff actually. And I've started to reach out to a couple of business owners. I spoke, I had a really nice conversation with Joe Parlivecchio from the Milton Chamber of Commerce, who had some really insightful ideas and that I think that we could follow up to as how they relate to the master plan. And then, of course, I'm open to any recommendations from anybody who has more experience in this than I do, because Milton is a big picture, right? And I'm also, although I may be familiar with East Milton Square, I'm not as familiar with Milton Village and any other opportunities with that. So Dick Barger out there spoken to me for a while, and I appreciated that. Some good ideas. So yeah, whenever you'd like to have me, I'll be ready.
Okay, all right, great. Sorry, I don't have the list in front of me. Elaine, how about you?
Housing? I
Housing.
think you all covered it last meeting. I'm joking. No, so I think, sorry, I was here. I was thinking that we could bring in maybe the trustee of the Affordable Housing Trust as
Great, okay.
as a start. I know that we heard from Chris Hart and Pat Lattimore last meeting. And they really touched a lot on housing and had some really great input for us. In my mind, and obviously this is open to everybody, I think our main partners in that area are the trustees, the Equity and Justice for All Committee, and then the Planning Department and Board, which we already have representation here for both. Some recommendations just off the bat would be to, like I said, bring in representative to speak at our next meeting. And then as recommended by Chris and Pat at the last meeting, I think that we could look to potentially update the preserve the town's character language, just so that there is clarity and that we don't have people making assumptions that may be our intention. I think that, if we seek opportunities to be a little bit more specific in what that means, we're not serving to entrench, social exclusion via single family zoning. So, for example, 3.11 states preserve existing housing stock by adopting and enforcing regulations that protect the town's character. Just thinking of things like how do we rework that wording, such as to include things like protection of historic buildings, protection of historic districts, landscapes and other resources are encouraging sustainable adaptive building reuse. So just kind of looking at the language that we have in our master plan existing now and ways that we could make improvements. And then maybe looking into ways that we could work to support some additional affordable housing, but that are non-age restricted. Because I think there was a percentage of, maybe it was 88%, correct me if I'm wrong, as part of our housing goals. So those are just some initial thoughts. I'm sure we'll come up as a committee with a lot of other ideas. But those are just some.
One thing I would suggest too, and maybe you can share it out, is the most recent housing production plan, because that was more recent than the master plan. It was adopted both by the select board and the planning board. And I know the Affordable Housing Trust is using that as well in terms of roadmap.
Okay.
Is Julie Kramer the current chair?
Julie Kramer is the Affordable Housing Trust's chair.
So I can reach out to her and see if she would be available in September. I just want to clarify my travel schedule first for that before I nail that down, but I'll just say September 18th tentative for her. Okay.
On that note, she'll be at select board tomorrow, discussing the Affordable Housing Trust's work at the town farm site.
How's that going? Tune in?
Maybe worth tuning in if you want to see more of Roxanne.
It's the board, the whole board.
We'll send Roxanne the question.
Okay. That makes sense. I think, the discussion about even the meeting minutes about what does preserving the town's character mean. It was at our last meeting, that was an interesting topic. And I've seen that too. I've, been on the planning board. It means different things to different people. So getting clarity on that. Do you have questions or suggestions, Regina Tabor, on the housing that Elaine commented on or suggested or discussed? No, okay. So we have Warren. We already said we don't know yet for that topic. And for housing, we said September. Roxanne, were you municipal resources?
I thought that's what it was, but then somehow it came up with cultural or something. So I'll be honest with you, I didn't do that. I didn't do any of
Yeah.
it for this time. So I'll have to go with.
Okay.
Is that true though, Josh? Because
I thought it was municipal.
I thought it was a municipal resource.
I
But then
just-
someone told me cultural, so I'm a little confused.
Well,
there.
I think it was in your minutes that you approved.
all right, so here's what I'm going to point out that the plans are required to have, I mentioned before, it was, I think 7 sections, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 sections. Historic and cultural resources, open space, recreation and natural resources, housing and neighborhoods, economic development, circulation and transportation, and facilities and services.
So I think that was sort of the facilities and services, right?
It's really sort of the municipal, like
Okay.
facilities and services. That makes sense if you.
I can do that for next time, but what are we looking for? I need a little more guidance.
Yeah, like what?
Please.
Okay,
Sorry to interrupt, a taper for facility, I thought. So it shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Because I just-
Oh, maybe it was.
Good people.
Well, you could be right, Elaine.
all right, so Regina and Tabor, what was your recollection of what you had agreed to do?
I definitely, I'm sorry that my dogs are going crazy right now. I definitely had open space and recreation.
Okay,
And I'm going to be honest, as the teacher who was very good at assigning homework, I did not do my homework this time.
that's okay.
But you have a list of folks to contact, including the Conservation Commission, which would be Rob Blebash and Kathleen O'Donnell, I believe. The park commissioners, Winston Daly, and then there's 2 others. In terms of recreation, Bonnie DeVore, I've been looking through a lot of the information about the programming that's available for the youth in town. I wanted to reach out to is it Ewan or Ulin? Rink. There's new pickleball facilities at Ulin for the summer. And the parks, including both the ponds and Cunningham Pool. One lesser known open space that may be underutilized are the cemeteries. At least when I was growing up in Buffalo, New York, those were not like just spaces for grief and mourning, but they were also actually places that we looked forward to going to, whether it was for Flag Day or just for picnics. So I wanted to explore what that's like here in this town. And then the open spaces that are left after the conservation swap, and what spaces are utilized and available in town center and in East Milton, including the gazebo. And I don't remember what the name of the overpass park is. Is there a name? Say it again.
Manning.
Manning.
Manning. Mhm.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll look into the
Regina, let me-
of that as well.
Let me point one thing out too. The planning department has we have an open space plan that was quite outdated. So they have a committee and a consultant who are working on an open space update.
Yep, so there's an open space and recreation committee, may not be the exact nomenclature. Chair Hall sits on it. We're working with Weston and we're working with a consultant to develop that plan. It was last updated in 2006, so well overdue. Just a week, 2 weeks ago, they released their open space and recreation plan survey, which can be found at miltonosrp.com. Also got business cards with QR code and planning department if you want them. So I would also check out that survey and reach out to that committee.
So who would that be?
Tim Zawinski staffs that committee, so you can reach out to directly.
And then one other thing I'll point out, Regina, is Rob did not seek a new term as on the Community Preservation Committee. So the chair is now Tom Callahan. And so if you wanted to reach out to him, and then Conservation Commission,
John Kiernan.
John Kiernan would be the chair.
And Ted
Okay.
Carroll is the chair of the open space.
Okay.
and Recreation Plan.
Sorry, I had Kathleen and Rob for Concom. What is the actual thing that?
Community Preservation Committee.
Oh,
I think is what-
okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the community,
That's
community,
Kathleen and Tom Callahan, and then Concom is
John Kiernan and
Kiernan, right?
Kathy Bowen retired
Right, that's right.
on Friday,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's just John Kiernan.
Mhm.
I have his contact info if you don't have it. I think it's also on the town website, but that's hard to navigate at the moment.
so one thing I would say is that there's actually some progress being made on some of these with the CPC funding. So I think that's a good, update for you to get, Regina.
Yep.
And then, the cemetery, director applied for funding for headstone repair. So you're speaking of the cemeteries, that's kind of interesting. And there might be because some of these are very historic, I think the application did not come in under open space, it came in under historic preservation.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. The applications are interesting. I just, joined the committee, planning board rep, and so I've been at a few meetings now and looking at these latest applications, but, and that's how became familiar with this basketball court near here, but I would definitely suggest those because I do think, what we recommend for an update, in terms of the master plan related to this category, because a lot of things seem to be in the works, but we haven't really talked about them, much on this committee. So I do think it'll be, you can decide after you make a few phone calls or email exchanges, who we might want to invite in. I mean, the idea is who do we want to hear from who's working on these things to kind of help us get informed, right? That's what we kind of suggested, what we were going to do. And so
Yeah,
if,
who's the contact for the Lower Guile Field renovation and stuff? Is that part of the Parks Department?
Parks-
Correct, right,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, Cunningham Pool is actually called Cunningham Pond. It's not a
Really?
pool, but yeah, it's
Oh my
Cunningham
God,
Pond.
wow.
Yes, that happened a few years ago.
Very sandy bottom.
It's totally changed. It's called, it's Cunningham Pond now, not a pool. Yes, yeah.
And,
Different regs.
there's a really
Just a little technicality.
there's some interesting proposed projects, around Pope's Pond, a bridge and a playground and an improved path. And then, Pine Tree Brook path, which would connect Pope's Pond to the Neponset River. So some, different kinds of open space things that are proposed. All right, so then Tabor, what was your recollection? Because what I don't have now is historic and cultural resources.
I was sort of hoping somebody else knew because I did not, I don't have any recollection. And it was open space last time around. And I know, I remember not, Regina was taking that. So I don't know what I've got.
So
Okay.
in your meeting in
My
May,
notes, yeah.
you were originally assigned to facilities where Roxanne was assigned to cultural resources.
Okay.
It sounds like that maybe is split.
No, I just trying to remember now. 'Cause I was
So
not
am I doing
prepared.
cultural resources then?
I don't care. I can do the, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do. So it's fine. What do you want to do, Kate? Do you want to stay with the other topic? It's fine. Whatever you want to do.
I don't know the first thing about cultural resources, but I could learn.
It's historic.
Yeah.
I'll take it on.
I could do that too. I mean, it's fine.
I'll take on the
What-
cultural resources and see what comes up.
So
I
Tabor,
have not done anything yet.
Okay.
Tabor, you may also want to reach out to Tom Callahan, CPC, because there's some applications that have come in on the historic for that,
Mhm.
just in terms of update. And then also, I'll just, Roxanne, do you know what the status, what's the status of the committee? There's a historic district planning committee, I think it's called.
Yeah. So probably reach out to them.
Yeah,
Is that,
They made a
but that's separate from the CPC?
yeah.
It is. It's a separate committee.
They made a recommendation to designate Milton Village a historic district.
And they're going to work on that, they said.
Yeah,
They're gonna
work on it.
that. Yeah.
So in order to get a local, well, to get a historic district that actually has what I would call more teeth than the national historic districts, more teeth meaning there's kind of local enforcement, like the national districts are nice for, like, if you want to get tax credit funding and other things, but they don't protect in the same way a local historic district does.
Mhm.
And the first step is to have a study committee.
That's what they.
And
yeah.
that's, it's a process managed by the Mass Historic Commission. So you can get some information from that committee. There's a chair. I went to speak to them once related to Milton Village.
We had somebody come and speak to us, I think, didn't we?
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
5, 6 years ago.
Yes, that's right. I think maybe it was the chair of the Historic Commission. Actually, that'd be another one to talk to. So Stephen O'Donnell.
Steve O'Donnell.
Steve O'Donnell. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can, I'm sorry, Elaine.
Oh, no, it's just clarification. So Warren, you're doing economic development,
Yes,
not circulation, right?
correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Dick, you're really circulation and transportation, I think, right?
I'll do that.
Yeah, because it fits with the traffic piece of it, right?
And
Okay.
going back to exactly what I'm supposed to be doing now?
Facilities.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Facilities and services. So if you look at the master plan, there's these goals and recommendations, but there's also these categories. So if you go back and you look at our spreadsheet,
Yeah.
you know, and you say, okay, under facilities and services, is there anybody here that we need to invite in? Or do we have enough information to make our recommendation about updates?
Okay,
So like, if we're gonna say, you know, let's just say Roxanne says facilities and services, you know, there's a lot of progress been made, a lot of it's ongoing, it's staff, it's departments, as long as their budgets are maintained, then, you know, there's not a lot of new update to the plan, for example, let's say. Or, you know, but something else where there's not a lot of progress, or there's new changes, like new laws, then we might be saying, okay, there is a greater need for an update. Like we said, we thought sustainability and DEI maybe could have some, those are kind of broader because it's not a category for those, but.
so in terms of like, excuse me,
Mhm.
in terms of the economic development, we now have the Milton Village overlay district. We're soon going to have East Milton Square overlay district.
Right.
So that's going to affect the overall master plan ideas.
Yeah, you know, like the owner of the Webb Mill building, which is at the corner of Adams and Elliott, came to the planning board for an informational meeting with a new proposal. And he's getting his chapter 91 approval now before he puts an application to the planning board. So that's definitely an economic development result of, but potentially of the zoning, because he was supportive of that overlay zoning, and he's going to come in under that overlay zoning. It's sort of a mixed use development.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very exciting. Yeah, the first project coming in under that. But yeah, that's right. That's sort of the idea is of unlocking economic development is to update the zoning.
Right.
And actually, it gives an alternative to the underlying zoning. That's what somebody can still do business if that's what they want. But yeah, I think is definitely a component of it.
And we're looking for primarily one speaker. Is that kind of the idea? And just an update, generally speaking?
I think so, but if you felt like it was really important, like, you know, open space has a lot of different components to it. If you felt it's important to have more than one, we can invite more than one.
Cool.
And you should speak to as many as you have the energy to speak to, right?
Yeah.
Don't feel like you can only speak to one person.
Yeah,
The first thing I always hear is parking
Yeah.
and traffic. So I started covering that already. But.
yeah, I mean, like if you're talking to folks about economic development, you could say, you know, are you familiar with the master plan? Are you familiar with its recommendations? Do you think that it needs to, you know, if you're not, can you, you know, especially for the chamber, like, can you make sure that your members are aware of it and you know that we're interested in some updates? Do you think your members would be interested in you know, some updates to it? Just, you know, again, like the chamber has that, the president of the chamber changes over time too, right? So an older or someone who was the president, you know, 5 years ago, you know, may have been familiar with the plan, but a new business to town may not even know the plan exists, right?
Right.
I think it's also helpful, like to your point earlier, is to like identify not just speakers to reach out to, but also the resources that we have existing. So housing production plan, things like that, and we can identify that too.
Exactly, and plug them into the.
Yeah.
Yeah, like our report, could have all these links to, the various updated reports, like the traffic mitigation, the housing production plan, the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, new committees like what might have been recommended. I think, doing historic study committee was a recommendation. Now that there is a committee, that all of those kind of updates, I think, could be I don't know how lengthy we want our sort of report to be at the end of our year from now, like about the update, but certainly somebody who's interested in one of these topics, if they knew that there was some progress being made and they could go to the town's website to find it, I think that would be helpful. All right.
Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so now with we said housing, so that's I think maybe we'll ask Josh or Tim on MBTA communities. We'll ask Julie Kramer for the Affordable Housing Trust, and I think that might be a lot for one, or enough maybe for one. Yeah. And then October, I guess, Warren, if you want to be ready for October, okay. And we can decide after that, unless you all want to map out now.
Then we see how how we're all doing with reaching out to our contacts.
Okay, so in September, we'll touch base again.
Yeah.
Okay. So I put the last item just to give an opportunity for anybody if they wanted to see something on the agenda that we haven't discussed already. So it's not intended to be too much, but just gives an opportunity.
One of the things that sort of goes in between what Walking is doing and I'm doing is something we haven't really talked too much about parking. And I think that's something that I just heard from Michael today, that it was, what is it?
Two parking benefits? No.
A recommendation.
New hires, a new.
So Milton Police Department has 2 traffic enforcement officers. I think one is named Seth, I don't know the other one's name, but Lieutenant Alba, who sits on the traffic commission.
Right, and any idea what they're supposed to be doing in terms of, is it moving traffic enforcement, or is it?
So it's parking enforcement largely.
Parking.
So they will ticket people. I don't know if we were actually speaking with Josh Wild at the gym site that's being redeveloped.
Right.
Whose customers have noticed an uptick in parking violations because they were used to a sort of lax enforcement atmosphere.
Those being kind.
So yeah, well, now we have 2 folks doing regular rounds.
But they're not policemen, are they?
Yeah.
Are they are police?
Yeah.
Giving out tickets,
Yeah.
as opposed to what we had before, which is a part-time worker who was.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if they're full-time officers. I can ask them to know,
Do
but
they ride in a cruiser, or is it the parking enforcement vehicles? Do you know?
I don't think there are specific parking enforcement vehicles.
This is the first I've heard.
Unless they're using one of the electric cars. or
No. They're
like
fully operated out of the police department and under Mark. So the specific mechanics of their job description, I'm not 100% clear on, but I know they're working. Someone is doing traffic enforcement the entire day that we have traffic enforcement guidelines in 7 to 7. We just updated the parking regulations on Central Ave and LA Street. So those signs went in, and we've seen some uptick in both sort of clarity of use and fewer complaints on like unfair tickets that we often see at the police department, as well as less infringement on the loading zone across them.
I have a question. Is it well known that the parking next to the Henry's building is public parking until evening?
I don't believe it's well known.
Is there signage there?
Because I don't think there's signage there. I don't know what their schedule is
It's in their.
I know
special
in their
permit.
special permit that it is.
I was just thinking about that because I was thinking, I was gonna suggest to someone they park there and I thought, you know, I don't know if people know that they can park there because I don't. The Hendrick, you know where the 131 Elliott is? There's that parking lot, outdoor parking lot. That's supposed to be public parking during the day and then shift to visitor parking at night. It's in their special permit, but I don't remember if the special permit said, I think it does say that there needs to be signage there. Because that would help.
It would help, I think what I'm thinking about though is, years ago, there used to be a parking lot down at Milton Village,
Yeah.
the town, it ended up selling to the families years ago, but the idea was that if you're gonna have parking during the day there, I think, which you probably don't want, I think, that people parking all day there and taking
That's supposed to
the
be-
subway, in town, that was supposed to be the purpose.
Yeah, so it would likely be like the lots in Milton Village.
Right.
It'd be 2 hour
Well,
regulated.
yes, okay.
But yeah, I don't think signage to that effect. Definitely there's not signage to that, there, in terms of timing regulations.
Okay.
I know there's been some confusion from residents and from the town although about whether that lot is operational because the sort of ground for commercial use isn't in effect.
That was the public benefit.
No, I
That project having the part of the provisions of that project being able to get a bonus for height, a bonus for other bonuses was
no, I don't
public
disagree.
benefit, and the parking public benefit was huge. And you're mentioning the parking made me think of it because I was thinking about that recently, whether that's actually been clear and whether there needs to be some enforcement of that special permit, which would come through the building
Yeah.
commissioner. But
Well, enforcement's the key, and I think that if you go to from some places I spent all the time in Needham, well, Belmont, there are people walking around all day giving out tickets. Now, I understand that if you're a business owner, that's you don't like the idea of someone ticketing your customers, but the fact of the matter is that you kind of help move traffic and move people in and out of those businesses long term.
One of the conversation topics that I had with Joe Arlecchio was the fact that a lot of the businesses in East Milton Square all have customers that come in around the same time, right?
Right.
They're all around the afternoon, or they stay for about the same period of time, right? A couple hours for dinner, a couple hours for the hair. So that kind of like, to a certain extent, you also want businesses that will have turnover too.
Exactly.
You want to mix a diversity of businesses so that you have those options there.
Yeah, and I talked about that, right, but I mean, I think that's as we start to come to grips with the point that there's going to be overlay and other things involved with East Milton Square, all those things have to be taken into consideration in a comprehensive manner, as opposed to be doing these one-off decisions, that you make one decision that may affect 10% of the people, but negatively affects 50% of the people.
yeah, the parking, there's been parking utilization studies funded through both our committee and planning department, and planning board in East Milton. And they recommend, every one of them recommends metered parking. But the chamber in the past has been absolutely opposed to metered parking. So it hasn't moved forward. But that, and it's because of the turnover
Right.
that you need to generate. And the other thing people talked about was it wasn't safe to cross. So if you parked over by the post office and you had young children with you and you were going to run errands on the other side, you know, is it safe to get your young children across? And that's why I was curious to see, you know, how it's working, because I still think traffic moves really fast, like around the corner of the post office. And so there might be parking spaces over there. It's not, that's Adams Street, right? There might be parking spaces on Adams Street, but do people use them and cross the Manning Park? I remember taking my kids before that was all redone, and I probably broke the wrist practically holding onto their hands to cross there because of the way people drove, you know? And so, anyway, I think that part of the problem is the location of the parking spots, not the total numbers. and the turnover at the ones that are closest to the businesses. So those reports are there. Planning department's done some work on it too.
Yeah.
Some of it's just the human behavior, like the employees park in front of their businesses
You think?
for 8 hours a day. I mean.
It's really about enforcement, right? It comes down to enforcement. So even if you have meters, right, you got to enforce that they're going to be there. And then people that don't want to use the meters can park on the side streets, right? So who's going to enforce that?
Well, enforcement's key. And I think, you know, in some places, like I think, I don't know if it was here that I mentioned it or planning board, but I was in Attleboro not that long ago, and they built 2 municipal parking structures. And their other private development, which was housing, didn't have to build the parking within their project. So they could use the municipal parking. And it was a way to, if like we have small properties for the most part that are hard to park. So if you had a central municipal parking that you could build or in some capacity have, whether it's a lot or a building, then we talked about that with Milton Village, remember, Dick? You know, because those parcels are too small to really manage the parking well. I mean, I did a 3-dimensional diagram. If you had to build parking for the Masonic building that's there right now, you'd have to build a building behind it just as big in volume to park the cars in it. So, you know, having something, the challenge is how much can you build and not be too much, you know, because you're never going to be able to have the amount.
Yeah, it's going back to what you just said. I mean, I think that this was before Josh's time, but I think going 2 or 3 planning directors that we've done these these parking sectors. There seems to be enough parking, maybe not right in front of exactly where you're going at the time, but what sort of follows up the whole equation is you're not going to enforce it. Like I was on these going today, making a deposit with one of the banks, and there was a car park in the handicap spot on the corner of Franklin Street and Adams Street. Now, what is that? What is that? Are you serious? I mean, can you park in a handicap spot? I mean, there are very few places.
You can get a big ticket normally if you.
Well, exactly. You know, it is sort of a ticket, but I think those are the types of things, you know, change in behaviors. People won't be happy at the beginning, but I think over time, people will come to grips with it. If you travel at all, I mean, any other time, you're going to find usually parking meters, you know, for a period of time, or enforcement.
Yeah.
So one thing I see what Regina's saying, so I'm gonna let her get into the conversation here. Regina, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think very recently, maybe in the last 3 months, some of these spots that used to be 2 hours on Adams Street, near, not far from Fitness Unlimited, but at the end of that block, were changed from 2 hours to 15 minutes. And I think it was something like half of the spots on that block, maybe 3 or 4. Sorry, again, the dog. Because now it's time to play with the school.
Your dog, so you're good.
And then the other thing I wanted to say is daytime parking is one thing, especially in the commercial district. But I think there's also really uneven enforcement of overnight parking. And I forget the official term for it, but hardship parking in neighborhoods. I am not one who really cares whether there's parking on town streets, but I know that's someone's idea of what Milton should be. But enforcement is so hit or miss and spotty and uneven, and I think even to the point of being unfair. I know there was a car parked up the street from me that got 4 or 5 tickets within the same like 10-day period, and there were plenty of other people parked on the street and none of them got tickets. So it's a really strange phenomenon that, you know, I don't know how much of it is just, you know, my anecdotal experience or if other people have similar experiences around town.
Well, as far as I know, there's no overnight parking, and I think how that happens too is I think sometimes people report it, so they'll call it in, if they see a car overnight. So I don't know that there's I actually don't know if there's anybody going around looking for it, like to look to get a card. I mean, I don't know about your experience, so I'm just saying in general. I've always thought that bless you, that it was like if you called, like if a neighbor called something in and saw a car that was being parked overnight, they reported it, then the police would come in and, look at it. But I just don't think they have enough manpower really to be doing that. I mean,
I don't know. I have a hardship.
Yeah.
I have a hardship permit and I've gotten ticketed 2 or 3 nights in a row before. And I mean, my neighbors wouldn't have called, I don't think my neighbors would have called it in. It's
or
just
somebody driving by. I mean, like I know I've seen that in different places. Like one of my neighbors on Dana Ave, she was constantly complaining because like the college kids were parking there from Curry. And, she wasn't calling it in. Police were going by. I don't know if they were doing anything about it. And then she started calling it in because they were like parking basically in front of her house. And then they were like, hanging out in front of her house late at night, like in the middle of the night. So I think, I mean, that's just been my own experience. I don't know otherwise. That's what I've seen. Yeah.
Well, having that be an understood policy, like, it would be useful too, right? From an equity sort of fairness point of view.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
use it.
why have rules if you're not going to enforce them or you're not able to enforce them? Like that's again back to being a teacher. Why are we having a dress code if nobody's going to call anybody on dress code? Like,
right. Well, one thing I'd say is parking ties to, back to the business district for a moment, ties to economic development. So, to the extent that you want to look at those reports for East Milton Square and Milton Village, I think you've got them all, Josh. And if you don't have Milton Village, let me know. I'm sure you have East Milton Square, but
I don't want to spend parking longer, but Bryant Ave,
Yeah.
there's spots along there and there's never anybody there.
those are supposed to be the service zone spots, right? Are they? No.
It's like
There's
the,
no signage that says service zone.
There is none?
No, I rented the building up there, the office space there, and the tenant didn't believe me, and I sent him to the police department, and they said, "Oh yeah, they're open," but they weren't assigned 2-hour, 15-minute or service zone. There was no signage. And this is going back a year or so, but
that's
Well,
underused park.
Yeah, I think it's also confusing because people don't know where 2-hour, 15-minute service zone.
Well, why is it confusing? Why do we have something that is confusing to the people in the town? I mean,
Right.
and, once again, if it's an issue, let's somehow deal with this issue once and for all, okay? I mean, we're doing this thing piecemeal. We'll change, we'll put a stop sign on the end of the street if someone calls in or
I agree,
someone
yeah.
calls in, Regina said someone calls in and they take their car or, things like that. So let's see, if we're gonna have rules, I agree, let's enforce the rules. If we don't want to have the rules, then just forget the rules.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna have some sort of a plan, let's have a plan that makes sense, enforce it, and people will, after a matter of time, will behave accordingly.
Well, having the business participate in the parking plan and having the businesses responsible for their employees to park in places that are designated for them would be a real key piece. And the chamber should want that kind of plan too, because it would be beneficial to everybody. So, I mean, I think to the extent, I remember the chamber presented the select board of parking analysis that they had done a couple of years ago. Maybe it was before you were.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But it was done in isolation. So, I mean, that's the problem with things done in isolation. So anyway, my point about that was maybe that can be part of the economic development. Because that, yeah, and if you want to dig yourself with it.
I think it's one of these things that's talking about it. One way or another, let's come up
So we'll
with something.
yeah, we're gonna have parking tied into that.
Underground parking at the fruit center.
Over another deck. Another deck, a different, because you can't do that park space. All right, since we're at 9:31. Is there anything else?
So,
Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
All right,
Yes,
all
favorite tag team.
all those in favor then, Regina,
Regina?
Yes.
Tabor,
yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Elaine,
Yeah.
Cheryl, yes. Enjoy the rest of your summer, everyone.
See you in
Bye,
September.
friends.